I was in Calgary when I had this, so I was a top sales guy. I had been that way for about 20 years. And then what happened was the day before 9/11, I joined a new tech firm. And within 6 months, I was the #1 salesperson in the entire country. Unfortunately, that tech firm was called WorldCom. Anybody remember WorldCom? 11 billion with a B, $11 billion in accounting fraud. I went from hero to zero in 21 days. And for the first time in my life, nobody would buy from me. And this had never happened. And I couldn't understand it. So I waited until August. I had some holiday time come to me. And I spent a month of afternoons reflecting on my luck as a salesperson. When was I good? When was I great? When was I just unstoppable? And I figured a few things out. Now, what happened when WorldCom admitted conducting all that accounting fraud, I was engaged. But the day that they admitted to conducting all that accounting fraud, her name was Marion, she came home that day and said if there's no security in my job, she's not having kids, and 3 weeks later, she moved out. Now, I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I said to myself, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it before I'm 40. So 6 weeks before I turned 40, I decided to take what I learned to do something with it. And I'm going to share with you the things I've learned from that reflection. The first thing I've learned about sales is luck. A lot of it's just luck. Now, the question is, can you make luck happen? My argument is yes. Luck is really just timing. How do you show up in front of the right people at exactly the right time? The second reason I'm here is I want to turn on this thing called selective perception. Anybody buy a Tesla in the last little while? Okay, when you buy a Tesla, what do you see all over the road? Teslas, they're like everywhere. So the same is true in sales. There's lots of things that hide in plain sight. Today I'm going to show you what they are. And my objective is when you leave today, you're going to see them everywhere. But the big thing for me is I want you to jump. It's not about learning something, it's about doing something differently. So at the end of this session, what I'm going to ask everybody to do is pair up with somebody else in the room and tell that person, what are you going to do differently based upon what we're going to talk about in the next 45 or so minutes. So if you want my slides, if you want to take a picture of a slide, this is the picture you want to take, the slides you want to take a picture of. If you use this link, it will take you straight to all my slides for the rest of the presentation. So you don't have to take copious notes, just sort of take your own ahas and write them down. So this is where my slides are. I'll just wait till everybody's had a chance to take a picture, and then I'll go on. Yeah, so at the age of 40, I discovered a few things, and I'm going to share what I've learned. So what's inside this presentation? I'm going to share 3 things. I'm going to share with you a different way at looking at what is often called an ICP. I'm going to share with you a way that you can create almost instant interest in any product or service. My argument is you can make an initial sale in less than 7 seconds. And that initial sale is purely piquing somebody's interest in what it is that you actually have. And then I'm going to share with you the process that I went through in the summer of 2002 that completely changed my life. So it's the August, not long after I became single, wanted to be an entrepreneur, reflected on my luck as a sales guy, figured a few things out, decided to start a company, and then I got involved in a competition for billion-dollar business ideas. Anybody here heard of Tim Draper? So Tim Draper had a billion-dollar idea pitch competition. And I was a snotty-nosed, 40-year-old first-time entrepreneur who built this 2-sided exchange to trade information. And I was looking at this contest, and it's open to anybody on the planet. And I see all these submissions from all over the world. And I'm like, wow, I should enter because I think I might win. And the way it works is you get to put 1,500 characters, not words, 1,500 characters on a website. And from all the submissions around the world, Tim Draper's supposed to pick 10 who all get 5 minutes to pitch to him over a webcam. Now, this is when most people didn't have a webcam, so if you got on the top 10, they actually shipped you a webcam so you could do the pitch. And you get 5 minutes to do your pitch. So I went around Calgary where I was living, and I told all these successful entrepreneurs, I think I'm going to be in the top 10. What do you think they all told me? Yeah, never going to happen, good luck. Like you're out of your league. So for whatever reason, it turned out when it came time to pick the top 10, Tim didn't actually pick 10, he picked 11. And guess who was 11th? I got my 5 minutes of fame. And I was 30 seconds into my 5-minute pitch. and Tim Draper starts asking me questions. And all I could think of is, can you please just shut up, because I've only got 5 minutes. But what had happened in the first 30 seconds? He was hooked. He loved the idea. The end of the thing, he says, send me a pitch deck, right? Come on down, share this with my team. I ended up winning the entire competition, got $1 million prize, and I spent a year living on Yerba Buena Island. Anybody know where Yerba Buena is? Yeah. Right, so I lived in the old officer housing, I don't know if it's even still there, on Yerba Buena. While I was here, Dow Jones twice chose my company as one of the 50 most promising companies in all of North America. I got some really cool coverage on NBC, and this was right about the time that LinkedIn came out. How many people got on LinkedIn like in the early days? Anybody know their user number? So there's 700 million people on LinkedIn. I'm user 3,956. I have 28,500 first-degree connections. A ton of them are down here. So I get into this contest, but before I win the contest, what do you think happens? I met a lady. Her name is Heather. I'm married. So what happened was, she plays French horn in the orchestra. She has to stay in Calgary to keep her job. I have to move to California to collect the money. So my promise to her was I was not going to be a successful entrepreneur with a ruined marriage and dysfunctional kids. So I came down, commuted back and forth every other weekend because we wanted to have a family. We're both in our 40s, right? We can't wait forever. And 6 months into my commuting back and forth, guess what happens? Yep, she gets pregnant. I have to go to Tim and explain that while I love his money, I love this lady more. I'm going to place a CEO, and I'm going to come home. My son is in this picture. He's an overachiever like his dad. Which one do you think might be my son? No, the one with 2 guns. That's my son. We have these water pistol fights. You should see the collection he has of water pistols, and now Nerf guns all over the place. So I came back home, and I got involved with something called the 10,000 Small Businesses Program. Anybody know Goldman Sachs, Babson College? Really cool program. They take medium-sized businesses and help them scale. They use these growth advisors. I'm the only non-American growth advisor they have in that program, because that's the thing I love to help people do. Did any of you here know GrowthX? Sean Shepard? I'm a mentor for those guys. Nudge, I'm on the advisory team for Nudge. I get to come down here a couple of times a year. So these 2 guys started a company called Eloqua, got sold to Oracle for $957 million. They spent 10 years saying that content was the way that you created revenue as a startup or as a company. It turns out that at the end of that 10 years and selling their company to Oracle, what they realized is that the marketing and content piece is not as important as relationships. It's the relationships that drive things. I hang out, when I'm not doing this around the world, I hang out at a place called Bow Valley College, right downtown Calgary. I am the entrepreneur in residence, and my job is help students to become startups. So I've been to a bunch of different places. Some of you from Australia might recognize a few locations. I've had a chance to do this all over the world, and every time I go somewhere, I learn something new. So as much as I'm here to contribute, I'm also hoping I'll get a chance to learn a few things. And I want to start by talking about what is called an ideal client profile. How many of you have an ICP? Wow, a few of you, kind of, sort of, maybe, right? You look at a market and say, everybody could be my customer. I hear this all the time from startups. Anybody could be my customer. It's not just anybody. It's people that actually have a problem that you can address. And even if you can address the problem, the hard part with this audience is you can't get to them. So you have to find the people that are reachable. And even the people that are reachable, the problem is they're not interested. They're not interested because they're not motivated. So my argument is, if you want to find a way to grow faster, you need to focus more on the portion of the marketplace that is more motivated to change and pretty much leave everybody else behind. A long time ago, there was an article written about this whole thing, and it basically says that if you chase a smaller market, you will grow twice as fast. So the question is, what's the portion of the marketplace that you want to chase? And we'll spend some time talking about this. So this, what I'm going to share with you, is the first thing I figured out in the summer of 2002. For almost 20 years, in all my 6, 7, 8-figure deals, there was this sequence of things that would happen, and I would talk to people, and a bunch of them would be in this buying mode of what is called status quo. Status quo are people that are happy with what they have and they see no reason to change. What's the likelihood someone's going to change if they're happy with what they have, even if you show up with something better? We want to know what the average close ratio is when you show up in front of someone who's buying mode of status quo. You want to guess? Yeah, it's like pretty close to 0. I think these people are a complete waste of time. Now, at some point, something happens, and this was my first epiphany in 2002. There is this thing called a window of dissatisfaction. These are people that are unhappy with what they have, but they're so busy solving other problems, they haven't gotten to this problem yet. Now, if you showed up in front of people like this, what do you think your average close ratio is now? Anybody want to guess? Pick a high number. No, not even close. It's closer to 75%. In fact, Forrester's research says it's 74. My history as a sales guy was 80. I thought I was brilliant. Turns out I'm actually not much better than the average. It's just getting to people who are here is really the secret on how do you get customers. The problem is we miss them way too often. Then they start the process of talking to a whole bunch of other people, so they're unhappy and doing something about it. If somebody picks up the phone and calls you, what do you think the odds of them becoming your customer is now? So it's 75% over here. What do you think it is over here? Sorry? It's about 15%. It's like you're like 1/5 as likely. And then maybe people will actually go away and continue the whole process. So what I've learned is whoever you're talking to, they're always in one of 3 different what I call buying modes. And I spent some time after having this discovery about this window of dissatisfaction and the different buying modes. And what I was trying to figure out after that was what would trigger someone to go from being in the buy mode of status quo to all of a sudden being in the window of dissatisfaction. What had changed? And it took me a few weeks, and then I had my second epiphany. It turns out it's this. So this is a married man going bald who every day wakes up older, heavier, grayer, balder, but doesn't go by Rogaine until he has a very specific event. What's the event that makes a married man go by Rogaine?
Divorce.
Totally, he gets a divorce, right? What do? You get up that day, you're like, okay, I need to go by Rogaine. You leave the house and you're on the way to the drugstore, but before you get to the drugstore, you see a gym. You're like, if I'm back on the market, I better lose some weight. So you sign up for a gym membership. You leave the gym and you're still on your way to the drugstore and you see a men's shop. You're like, if I'm going to lose some weight, I better buy new clothes. You leave the men's shop, you buy the Rogaine at the drugstore, but between the drugstore and your house, what is there? There's a Ferrari dealership. And you buy yourself a brand new car. All of this because of one specific event. So let me give you a different example. Let's talk about life insurance. What do you think is the number one thing that triggers more people to buy life insurance than everything else combined? Absolutely. You pee in a stick and guess what happens? You give up your house in a busy street, or you give up your apartment, you move into a quiet neighborhood. You give up your Mazda 323, you buy a Subaru station wagon. And all of a sudden, what do? You buy life insurance and you have a will. It turns out the exact same thing happens in business, not just in consumers. So people start out in this buying mode of status quo. I'm happy, I see no reason to change. Then all of a sudden they have an event. Now all of a sudden they want to change. When they want to change, now they're in this window of dissatisfaction. They're thinking of changing, right? You talk to someone who will say, can you phone me back in 18 months? Because then I'll be ready. But the problem is you phone them back in 18 months or 15 months, and what's happened? They've already bought something. So you need to find a way to get in front of these people. Now, just because they want to buy doesn't mean they will. They generally have to have a second event. The second event is when all of a sudden they can afford to change. Now they have more money, or now they have more time. And it's only then when they'll start this process of actually searching for alternatives. And some of you might even have some customers like this that are interested, gone through this process, but they haven't decided to buy from you yet because there's a third event they have to have. So let me give you an example. How many of you got the first iPhone when it first came out? Yeah, so I got the first, not the first iPhone, but the first model, but I live in Canada. I found it on eBay. It was $660, okay, US. I found some software to hack into it. The provider I have at home is a GSM network, so guess what? I could bring it here. Now, I went to my wife and told her about this $1,000 phone. What do you think my wife said to me? You're crazy. Like, what's wrong with your own phone? So I couldn't justify the purchase, and I didn't buy it. But about 3 months later, something happened. My son, who was about 2.5 years old at the time, found my wife's really nice Motorola flip phone, and guess what he did? He broke it in half. And I went to my wife and said, here, dear, you can have my really nice Sony Ericsson. I'm going to go buy the iPhone. The difference was the third event allowed me to justify the purchase to somebody else. And this, for me, is one of the things that most of us struggle with, is how do we help someone justify the purchase? Now, I have an acronym I use to help people justify a purchase. It's called RIPES. So this is not on the slides. So if you're going to write something down, this might be the only thing you have to write down. It's an acronym. So write RIPES down the piece of paper. R stands for risk avoidance. I stands for image. P stands for productivity. E stands for expenses. And S stands for simplicity or speed. And these are the 5 ways that people generally justify the purchase to somebody else. But people have to have all 3 of these events before they actually become your customer. Yeah, there's one more over here if someone wants to sneak over. So I figured this out in 2002. McKinsey came along about 7 years later, figured out the exact same thing. They looked at 20,000 consumers in 5 different industries in 3 different continents. They got almost the exact same thing. There's a loyalty loop, okay? So status quo, do the same thing, do the same thing, do the same thing. All of a sudden, something triggers somebody's interest. They create what's called an initial consideration set. We'll come back to this. The only thing I think McKinsey's missing is that I think people don't start the active evaluation process until they have more money or more time. That's the only thing I think McKinsey misses. Google came along a few years later. Anybody here a marketer? Heard of the 0 moment of truth? Right, created by a stimulus. In my world, that stimulus is an event. Okay? Big companies get this. They understand it doesn't matter if you're selling refrigerators or jet engines. It applies. Gartner came out a few years later, exact same thing. Figured the same thing out. Inspiration would be some sort of an event. Okay? They abandon because they have a bad experience. That's an event. They'll buy sometimes because they can justify, but the hard part is usually about half of the time they will completely abandon the buying process. Why would they do all this work and then not go buy something? Why would they abandon it? What would make them not pursue something they spent all this time investigating? So cost, maybe. Justify. They cannot justify the purchase to other people. That's the biggest problem. That's why half the deals we lose because people can't justify the purchase. Okay? And again, in my world, Gartner doesn't talk about these triggers. This is the way that I live in. McKinsey came out in 2017, and here's what they figured out in 2017, that the initial consideration set is where most of the deals are won or lost. If you are not considered to be the kind of solution that people are after, you're never going to get them as a customer. So this is where I want to talk a little bit about the difference between competition and competitors, because I think it's an important piece. Okay? Now, if I made you all owners of a jewelry store, you all own a jewelry store, okay? Who do you compete against? No.
Some other way to use your money.
Totally. Who spends more money on jewelry, men or women? Men. When do men spend money on jewelry? Yeah, when they're stupid, okay? When they want to say to their wife, I love you. Birthdays, anniversary, Christmas, Easter. What could men spend money on instead of jewelry? Flowers. What else? Chocolate. What else? Perfumes, right? Cars, pets, purses, and trips. So for my 10-year anniversary, my wife and I are foodies. She plays French horn for the orchestra. She works every Friday and Saturday night. If I want to date with my wife, I have to book it 6 months in advance. So what I decided for our 10-year anniversary is we're going to go on a vacation. Anybody recognize that place in the bottom right-hand corner? It is called San Sebastian, Spain. It is the food capital of the planet. There are more Michelin-rated restaurants in San Sebastian, Spain than anywhere else on the planet except for Tokyo. So what did I decide to do? I decided to find the most expensive hotel I could, right on the beach with an amazing view. And like any good husband, what did I make for dinner on my anniversary? Reservations. Okay? This is Zubeira, 1 Michelin-rated star. This is Arzak. When we went, it was the number 16 rated restaurant on the planet. We had an amazing, like I could feel the emotion because I still, like the food there was just amazing, and yet it was completely non-snobby. And this whole thing was, I could have spent that $10,000 in a bunch of different ways, but I chose to solve the problem by using travel to say sorry to my wife that we don't get to spend more time eating out when we're at home. So when you think about competition, don't just think about people that do the exact same thing you do. I hear all these entrepreneurs say, we have no competition. It is entirely possible you might have no direct competitors, but you always have competition. Competition is a completely different way that someone can solve the exact same problem. So this is one of the things, if some entrepreneur comes to me and says, we have no competition, I'm like, you have no idea about your business. So how many of you are willing to admit you've said that at least once? We have no competition. Don't be shy. Okay, the rest of you are liars. Okay, so if you want to learn more about this, I learned about this in a Harvard Business Review article a long time ago. If you want, you can read the really fat book, but my argument is 9 pages, 20 minutes. You'll learn everything you need to know about what do you really compete against, because you don't compete against the people that do the exact same thing or similar thing you do. Okay? So what I've learned is these events, these triggers that make people want to change, they come in 3 different flavors. I call them the A's, B's, and C's. The A is what we try. We try to use an awareness strategy. We go to somebody and say, we're better, we're faster, we're cheaper. The problem is it doesn't work. The only thing that I've seen work is when you can go to somebody and say that people either A, have to change because the law says you have to. So I don't know what the law is down here, but all of a sudden there was this hands-free law where if you got caught with your phone in your hands, you got fined $1,500. I mean, that's the time that everybody went away and got Bluetooth visors for their car. Or you find a way that someone can avoid risk. Show up with something that's a less risky alternative. Maybe that works, but the economics seldom does. The challenge with this, though, is if you go to somebody with a really good idea and somebody else has a better relationship, who's going to get the business? The person with the better relationship. What's your first name? Volkan. And your first name is? Graham. So Graham gives me a really good idea. You do the exact same thing. I'm going to borrow your idea and give it to the guy or gal I'd much rather do business with. So my argument is this strategy isn't worth it because all you're doing is creating interest for somebody else to go away and get business. The B is bad experiences. How many of you have ever changed a cell phone provider or a cable company, right? You have a bad experience and you switch. It's not so much they want to be your customer, they just don't want to be somebody else's. It turns out that a change in salespeople is actually one of the events that triggers lots of people to switch. And in my 20 years, I got transferred and moved to different places, and it drove me crazy, and I never really understood that I would have this $1 million account that was handed to me because the person there before had a really good relationship. I show up, and the buyer decides they already have a number 2 person, they're going to give it to that person. The data says that 28% of all vendor switches are triggered by a change in account managers. So when we have a sales team, sure enough, what's going to happen to your salespeople every now and again? They're going to leave. They're going to change. So the question is, how do you hang on to those customers when those changes happen? And my argument is when the new salesperson comes along, there's 3 questions the salesperson should ask, starting at the top of the organization and working their way down. The first question is, and I don't have these on a slide, the first question is, what did my predecessor do that I need to keep doing? The second question is, what does my competition do that I should start doing? The third question is, what does nobody do that you wish everybody did? Now, I learned from when I lost that $1 million customer, because when I moved to Vancouver and was given a $5 million customer, I knew I had to keep them as a customer, a good customer. I was going to be in trouble. And I went through that process from the top all the way down the organization. And this was in the mid-90s, and I got one response from almost everybody around, what does nobody do you wish everybody did? And it turns out that email was becoming prevalent. And all people wanted to know was the fact that I had received their request and to give them a time of which they should expect an answer. Today, with all these spam filters and junk boxes we have, I think that's as prevalent a problem. So if any customer or prospect gives you something, at least send an email back and say, I've got it. Give me until Tuesday to get back to you. Sometimes there's a change in the product. So Microsoft changed, and I forget when I bought myself my first Mac. I think it was like after 98 or XP, and their whole thing was you need to migrate to the next version of Windows. And I'm like, no, I don't. I have not been on a Windows machine ever since. But it was the change in the product that made me all of a sudden move to a different vendor. Sometimes there's something material that happens with the provider, like a lawsuit or something of that nature, people just abandon, right? That happened to me at WorldCom. But these are the ones I like. These are changes that happen inside your prospect or customer's world. A change in decision makers, which is golden. A change in places. Sometimes they do business now in a different location. Or something changes their priorities. One of my favorite examples I learned of in Chicago once, I was having a dinner with some customers, and one guy came to me and said, yeah, I used to work for Citrix, and one day the CEO announced $45 million in McKinsey Consulting. There was no event. And I'm like, nobody spends $45 million on McKinsey Consulting if something isn't wrong. And about 20 minutes later in the conversation, what I learned was just before that CEO admitted that he's now going to spend all this money on McKinsey, it was VMware who had announced they'd reached $500 million in revenue, and all of a sudden the CEO got up that day and said, crap, now I have to do something. So there's always these things behind the scenes. I'm going to talk about changes in people. It's my favorite thing. I'm a big believer if we're going to chase somebody, the people we're chasing have three things: money, authority, and influence. These are the people we want to pursue. Far too often, we're too far down the organization. My argument is this person is a vice president or higher. Okay? So, an ideal client profile. Who's got an ICP? Okay, so what's your ICP?
So, I don't know if it is the ICP,
Okay.
but we are pitching on specific set of customers who have a large distributed workforce, geographically distributed, and
Okay.
they have a multilingual requirement.
And who's the guy or gal you're selling to?
So, either the VP of operations or VP of HR.
Okay.
Consumer lending.
Okay.
No, consumer lending.
So my argument is your ICP is the guy or gal at the top. You pick the title and the industry and the size of that company. But the problem, when people get to this sort of point in their career, they've already got these really good relationships. So the question is, where do these people come from? Like, what's the job they had before this one, and can I find a way to build relationships earlier in the process? And 80% of the time, it's generally somebody who works for a smaller company and the company grows, or they get headhunted and they get brought in here. Somewhere around 20%, it might be somebody inside the organization. But then the question is, where do these people come from? Same sort of thing. This person here starts down here. You would think that this person comes from someone like this, but when I first did this, I noticed there's actually an anomaly, because this guy or gal is a controller for a big company and wants to be the CFO, but they can't get there directly. So what do? They go over here and work for a smaller company to get a bigger title. So my argument is you're looking for decision makers who just got a job. So looking at someone like this CFO who gets promoted here, that's the kind of person that you want to go after. Because the data says that 40% of all decision makers, VPs or higher, who are new in their job, they'll make decisions worth $1 million or more in the first 90 days. Right? So I actually have a spreadsheet. This is a link again I used. Just be careful in this case. because the capitals matter. But if you fill in just the yellow cells, it will build out your entire ICP of who are the relationships that I want to start building, having them with now, so I know they're going to get to there at some point later on. So I'm a big believer of relationships matter. And the big reason is what is called transactional velocity. So if I showed up in front of you to sell you something and you don't know me, we spend a lot of time doing this dance till I actually have enough credibility that you'll actually become my customer. But once someone's bought from you once, you have this relationship, people trust you, it's basically a couple of phone calls and stuff gets done. And all of that is based upon relationships. And the longer you've known somebody, the more likely they are to trust you, the faster they will become your customer. So I'm a big believer of it's the person who's new in their job. Again, VPs are higher because these are the people that tend to make decisions right away. So 80%, so the data says this. The data says that 40% of all decision makers will spend $1 million or more in new initiatives in the first year. But 80% of that 40% do it in the first 90 days. So job changes. That's the secret. So if you've got a customer, let's say it's Kate, okay, and Kate is the VP of what, operations or finance? Operations. So Kate was your customer. She gets a new job. What are you going to do?
Congratulate her.
Yeah, and you're going to follow up that she can be your customer again. What's the second opportunity?
The new person is
No. Who has more money, more authority, more influence than Kate? No. The person that Kate replaced. Because where has that person gone? Because odds are that person has moved to a bigger company or taken a bigger title, has more money, more authority, more influence than the job that they used to have. So yeah, the second person is, who did Kate replace? Now, what's opportunity number 3? The person that replaces Kate. Totally get that. Now, you go to see Kate's replacement, and their first name is? Noah. Noah. You're going to see Noah. What's the first question you're going to ask Noah when you go see him? How's Kate? He doesn't know Kate. He's brand new.
What are your objectives?
No. First question you want to ask Noah. He's new in his job. Maybe. So I'm not a fan of asking why questions because what I've been taught and what I believe is why questions make people defensive. So learn how to ask a what or how question. So maybe what about the job appealed to you the most? But that's still not the question I'm after. I'm after Kate. Totally. Why? Because somebody's going to be new in that job at some point, and that person's going to show up, and they're going to shake things up. So I've been teaching this strategy for quite a while, and people said to me, it doesn't scale, it doesn't scale, it doesn't scale. And a few different things all happen on the same day. One, I had a salesperson send me an email and didn't put their phone number at the bottom of their email signature. It drives me freaking crazy. So I hunted this kid down and I ranted on him and said, you need to put your phone number at the bottom of your email signature. So I'm semi-frustrated, okay? Then I go to one of my classic coffee meetings to help a startup. They don't show up. And it was someone who just said, this doesn't scale. And I'm like, okay, now I'm frustrated. And I have an hour to myself because someone bailed on a coffee meeting. I'm going to bring out Excel. Let's see what actually happens. So if you start with, let's just say, a list of 100 VPs of operations, here's what the census data tells me. The census data tells me 3 of those people will change jobs every single month. So in January or month 1, 3 people change jobs. I'm going to follow up with those people. And I'm going to find out who did they replace. Now the next month, what happens? 3 more people change jobs, 3 more people they replaced, people that then take their place. So you can start building out this list of prospects just because you're following all these job changes. Now you might say to yourself, this is not a lot, but what happens when you add them up is all of a sudden it gets to become a really big number. So I'm a huge believer of tracking job changes. How many of you sell something that's a software as a service? Okay, you have all these people that are licensees. When that license gets canceled or transferred, what does that tell you? Somebody's changed, gone to a new job. We have them on a mailing list and their email address bounces. Way too many marketers just take them off the list. I'm like, no, take that name or take those names, give them to your best salesperson or send them off to your outsourced sales team in India or wherever it is. Let them follow up on those job changes. That's the biggest opportunity there is. Now, When you get a chance to tell somebody about your product or service, this is what I find most people do. They tell everybody what it is that they're selling. And that's a problem. The problem is, because it's like pushing rope. Anybody tried to push rope before? Right? Unless you freeze it, it's -40 in Calgary, it is going nowhere. Yet that's what we all do. We pick up the phone, we call somebody, we tell them exactly what we're selling. And what do they usually say to us when we get there? Right? So I'm going to come to Noah and say, Noah, would you like a new phone? What are you going to say to me? No. I've already got one. I'm happy with my current vendor. So the way that you create interest in what you do, it's kind of like building a bridge. In the old days, the way that we built bridges, you would have one person on one side of the valley with a bow and arrow. And on the other side of the valley, you would have someone hiding in the bushes. And this person would shoot the arrow across the valley. Now, attached to that arrow is some thread. And the person on this side of the valley goes to the arrow, pulls on the thread. What's at the end of the thread? There is some string. And they pull on the string, and what's at the end of the string? There's some rope. And with the rope, they can take the rope, tie it around a tree on the other side, and start the process of building a bridge. But you can't take the rope and throw it all the way across the valley. So for me, we need to figure out, how do we find a way to create interest in what we do by just throwing something across the valley that has the other person ask a question? And the only question I want someone to ask is, how do you do that? And that's when you can create instant interest in your product or service. So that instead of trying to tell people what you want to say, how can you tell people what they want to hear? I call it a 7-second sale. In my world, I prospect a couple of hours on Monday morning because something's either on somebody's list of something to get done this week or it's not. If it's not on their list, they're not going to give me any time. When's the second time I might phone somebody? So I'm going to phone them Monday morning because it's on their list. When else am I going to phone them? Friday. When on Friday? Towards right after lunch. It's been on their list all week, or it got on their list this week. They'd love to solve the problem before they go home for the weekend. So I just tell people, what do? Even if I leave a voicemail, what I say to people is I help more of your reps make quota. So if I pick up the phone and I call Noah, and I go, hi Noah, my name's Craig, and I have a really simple way for more of your reps to make quota, he's going to ask me how. And then this is the mistake that most entrepreneurs make. They would tell Noah how they do it. This is a problem. Jeffrey Gittimer taught me this, right? Because what ends up happening is we puke all over our customers. This is how we do this, right? No, we need to understand more by asking some questions about the problem Noah has. So I might ask Noah, how many salespeople do you have, Noah? Lie a little bit. 20,000, okay. And what percentage of those actually make quota?
5%.
Yeah, let's say half, which is pretty typical. And then I would ask the question, why do you think your reps can't make quota? Why do most sales reps not make quota? What do they suck at? What do you think is the most common answer? They can't close. And that's when I'll say to Noah, I don't think that's your problem. Would you be willing to invest 5 minutes in a conversation and I can tell you what I think the problem really is? Does Noah have any idea what I'm selling yet? No, but I'm solving a problem. He's like, tell me what the problem is. And then I'll say to him, it is not a closing problem. It's a prospecting problem or a qualifying problem. And let me tell you why. So what I've done in that call is I have reframed what Noah thinks is the problem. And I am the first person he's talking to about solving that new problem. So when we phone these customers who are in the window of dissatisfaction, or prospects rather, what we're trying to do is reframe what they think is the problem so they spend money on trips instead of on jewelry. And that, for me, is where you'll be way more successful when you get to people early and redefine the problem so they think about your solution as the best way to make that actually happen. Now, all of this stuff that I figured out because I don't analyze the deals I lose. I just analyze the deals I win. Now, for 20 years, I had sales managers. If I ever lost a deal, what would my sales manager always tell me? Don't lose the lesson. So you do all this lost sales analysis, hoping you can figure out how to win more, right? If you ever go see Guy Kawasaki will tell you hope is not a strategy. Sometimes he's annoying because no matter what you tell him, he says, hope is not a strategy. I'll come up with it multiple times in a conversation. So what happened when I did this in 2002, I went to the internet out of curiosity, and I typed up a phrase between quotes, lost sales analysis. So it's the summer 2002. I type in this phrase between quotes. How many pages do you think there were on the internet that talked about how to analyze the deals you lose? 50,000 pages on the internet. I took out the word lost, and I replaced it with the word won. So now I'm looking for the phrase won sales analysis. How many pages do you think I found on the internet then? 2. Of all the time people spend analyzing the deals they lose, they spend no time analyzing the deals they win. Sorry? That was on Google. Good question. Yes. Okay, a little dig there. That's okay. I get that. But no, this was on Google. I'm like, wow. So I realized I had something. So here's my process. Every time you win a deal, now when you get to the point you're winning lots, you might focus on the ones that happen fast. You get to a decision maker. People don't nickel and dime you to death, and they're willing to be a reference. But in the short term, every time you win a deal, we should analyze the deals we win. So here's what happens. People have an event they want to change. We should ask them, what was that event? Now, the challenge with question number 1 is it tells you about event number 2 when they could afford to change. And what I've learned is that as time goes on, their interest or motivation to change goes down. So I got to get to people sooner. So question number 2 is, when did these events happen? And more times than not, they'll then tell me about the first event that made them all of a sudden want to change. At what point did their expectations get beyond their perception of the performance of what they're using today? Now, last question. What made you choose us? If you want to have a really good value proposition that has no nouns that describe the product or service, you need to ask your customers, what made you choose us? And what you're listening for are the verbs they use to describe the outcome they got out of being your customer. So whether it's have more reps make quota, turn more B players into A players, shorten a sales cycle, grow twice as fast, these are the things that customers tell me. So when if I'm going to leave a voicemail, I'm going to say exactly that on the voicemail because that's the way they call me back. What should question number 4 be? Any idea what question number 4 should be? Can you refer me to somebody else? What else do you need? No, my argument is we can learn from a guy whose name is Kurt Lewin. Kurt created this process called force field analysis. There are all these drivers for change. We're telling these people, there's our risk avoidance, image, productivity, expenses. These are all the reasons people change. But there's all of these reasons that people don't change. All these things people have to do before they can become your customer. So do you think you're better off creating more driving forces or taking away the restraining forces? Who in the room would add more driving forces? Put your hands up, don't be shy. Okay, so nobody, 1, 2. Okay, everybody else is going to figure out how do you take away the things that prevent people from becoming your customer? So that's actually the right approach. Let me tell you why. Math. So let's pretend that you could add all these forces up, and it's a total of 20. If they're in equilibrium, the other side would be 20. Now, you can do one of 2 things. You can add 5 to this side, or take 5 away from the other side. If you add 5 over here, you're 25 over 20, which is what, 1.2? Now, if I take 5 away from the other side, and now it's 20 over 15, it's 1.33. So I think the big question we should be asking people, because there's always this hurdle or barrier becoming our customer, ask people, what can we do to make it easier to become our customer? Now, years ago, I got introduced to a EVP for a very large logistics company. I got introduced, I went into his office, we had a 20-minute conversation. We picked the date, we picked the time, we picked the price, right? And he says, how would you like to get paid? I say credit card. So he pulls out an American Express card. Now, what's the problem, do you think, at that time? I only take Visa and MasterCard. He pulls out an American Express card. So here's what I know. I know that if I don't take that American Express card, he's going to send a request off to purchasing. Purchasing is going to have 3 approved vendors, right? I am never going to get the deal. So you're me, you're in front of this guy. He just put down an American Express card. What are you going to do? Take the number, phone American Express, and 3 days later charge his card. It's exactly what I did. I now take American Express. So how do you find a way to make it easier for someone to become your customer? What should question number 5 be? Maybe. There's something really important before someone will refer you to anybody else. We need to understand this, otherwise we're going to lose this customer. If you're in a SaaS world, you have this problem. It's called churn. So my argument is, question number 5 is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you with the purchase? Now, Noah's going to give me an 8. What's the next question I'm going to ask him? Why? Who said why? Yeah, no why questions, okay? At least not in my class, okay?
How can I make it 10?
Yeah, not how do I make it better? How can I make it a 10? Because once he's a 10, then I can ask for an introduction and find a way to get to somebody else. So I came here for 3 reasons. 1, help you understand the impact of timing, right? 2, turn on the selective perception. Hopefully now you will hear or see differently, because you'll talk to someone who says, I'm thinking of changing, call me back in a year. What do you know about that person? You want to get some time with them now, not later. Right? Someone describes the problem they have, not the product they want to buy. These are also people in the window of dissatisfaction. But the big thing I want to have happen out of today is that you do something based upon the conversation we just had for the last 50 minutes. So here's what I want everybody to do. All right? I want you to stand up. Go find somebody you don't know in the room. I want you to shake their hands. I want you to tell the other person, what are you going to do differently based upon the conversation we just had for the last 50 minutes. So let's take a couple of minutes, go find somebody, shake hands, tell the other person, what are you going to go do differently, okay? 2 minutes, go. Did you take something away?
I did. I'm gonna need to do a better job of framing their problem rather than ours.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If I can help, you'll find me on LinkedIn.
Right on.
Don't be shy. And your first name again was?
Jot.
How do I spell that?
P-R-A-B-H.
P-R-A-P-H?
J-O-T.
J-O-T, okay.
H is silent.
It's a sound. Put it. Okay, 1 more minute.
I have to run. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Do you have a card on you?
I do, yeah. What did you take away from today?
Setting the hook earlier. I love the 7 seconds.
Right?
Fantastic. So, my wife
And it's not that hard,
No.
right?
My wife is a sales manager for Comcast Advertising.
Okay.
So they're always looking for stuff like this. I'm going to pass her card to her.
So then here, 1 for you, 1 for her.
Perfect. Awesome. That's great. Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, 30 seconds left and we'll come back, okay? Okay. If I can get everybody to go back and take their seats, did you learn something new? Yeah. There we go. So I came and saw Paul. Paul's with Ty. And I was really impressed because I came actually as a guest, and I came to learn something from Paul. And then I went at the end of his session to go say hello. And he's like, I think I'm in your session on like Wednesday. And what impressed me, you've been doing sales for how long and teaching it for how long?
Years.
He's like, I came to see if I could learn something. That, I think, is the biggest thing we should all spend more time doing. How do we find a way to be curious? We can always get better, right? I came to learn from him, right? Paul, pleasure. So, sales is like life. If you want something, all you have to do is what? Ask. So I would be a hypocrite if I didn't ask something of everybody in this room. In fact, I'm going to ask for two things. The first thing I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask you to hold the other person accountable for the promise they just made to you. Here's the other thing I'm going to ask for. I'm going to ask you to hold yourself accountable for the promise you just made to the other person. Okay? I think most of you took a picture of my slides. I gave away my book. So when I left California, I went back to Calgary. I was home for 3 days and got asked to go speak at a CEO conference. And I had this little 25-minute speech about some of the stuff that was in here. And a whole bunch of the CEOs in the room all said, wow, that's fantastic. I've never seen anything like this before. Can you give a 2-day version to my team? Now, in my head, I'm saying, all I have is 25 minutes. But what I said to them was, I came home to be a dad. Give me 6 months, you can have the half-day version. And then everybody wanted me to travel to go do this. But I wanted to find a way to spend more time with my son, so I wrote a book. The theory being I could just give people the book. It turns out the book won all these awards, and now even more people wanted me to actually go all over the place. So one of the things I just finished doing is there is a group in Canada called the Canadian Professional Sales Association. I just finished off with them. We'll release it in a couple of weeks, an online version of this, and it's all about how can you use social media to get customers. So if you want interest, go ahead. This is totally free. You will find me on YouTube. I'm youtube.com/Craig Elias. What I learned is I need to own my brand. So the lady you saw in the picture, when I met Heather, she was 40 years old. She was a minister's youngest daughter, never been married, wanted to have kids. I was the same way. So we just started dating, and we're like, let's try and have a family. And oh, by the way, you can go back to your dad, who's a church minister. You can explain this whole situation to your dad. Now, her dad, being a church minister, knows how to use a computer, had heard of this thing called Google. So he went to Google to find this guy named Craig Elias. Turns out I have an evil twin. He's a murderer in Pittsburgh. So I've learned, even for all of us in the room, people hear of us, where are they going? They're going to Google to find us. We should all have our own branding all over the place. This is my contact stuff. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. I will say yes as fast as I can. And I don't have to be anywhere until like 2 o'clock at the airport. So if somebody wants to drive me to the airport, they can have an extra 30 minutes of my time. Otherwise, I'll call an Uber, okay? Thank you, everybody.
I just wanted to say a quick, huge thank you to you. Thank you for coming and talking to our members. I know it's usually